welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to talk about how to draw a Mohol Bushbaby. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the Bushbaby. They're very cute. So, we're going to get started. They have a couple different variations of gray. They have like a dark gray by their eyes and on top of their head, and then this lighter gray. They can be brown, but we're going to stick with gray. You know, as I draw, always alternating, putting one line in between two others as I build up the fur. Just try and be mindful of fur direction. I'm going to bring this down into his nose a bit too. Being mindful of fur direction and fur length. So they have relatively short fur by their faces, so we're going to keep that nice and short. Alright, now for the darker gray. And then, of course, there's pink on the nose and inside the ears. Alright, now for the pink. Now there is some hair that you can see coming into their ears. Very small hair, their fur color. But we're going to sort of draw the whole thing in pink. And when it's skin, you don't have to worry about how long the strokes are. Because, well, skin has no fur length. Alright, so we're going to start with the light gray color. We're going to have the light source coming in from over here. I know I always do that. I should switch it up sometimes, but it's a little easier on my hand this way. As always, when I say a light source is coming from a certain direction, I mean above and in front of. It's not behind or next to, which means all edges, including the edges on the side of the light source, will be in shadow. It's just that the shadowing on this side will be less than the shadowing on this side. But all edges are in shadow because as the figure, we're a three-dimensional object, so as the figure rounds away, right, you have this rounding that's happening in the face, and that means that it's turning away from the light source. And this is full pin pressure as we build this in. We're just going to follow the lines we already did when we sketched it out. Okay, so just like I usually do, there's going to be a little bit of highlight on this side because the nose isn't big enough to block that. But, like always when I do that, it's easier when I'm dealing with sort of a tight space to do it all in shadow first before I add the burst of highlight. So I'm just going to build in the highlight now in on his cheek. And I'm not doing it by putting a lot of pin pressure. I'm not holding back, but I'm not putting a lot of pin pressure. I'm doing it by just adding more lines. So I keep turning off this dark gray because it's hard to see the color difference. I can see it, you can kind of see the line of the dark gray in here, but it's just a little harder to do, so it's just easier to turn it off. And then again, all edges are in shadow, so even though this side's on the side of the light source, this edge will still be in shadow, and then we'll kick it right back up to highlight. And then underneath, of course, also in shadow. Now as we come to this back side here, it's almost the back side of the ear, the way the head bends. So some of this is going to be transitioning into shadow, especially along the back. And then of course this side, shadowed side, so it would, you know, most of it's going to be in shadow, which is just lighter pin pressure. Now up the side of the ear, on this side, right, this side it goes into shadow, this side highlight, because it's catching. It's turned towards the light source. Alright, now for this darker gray. As you come around the eye, there's going to be some shadowing, because the upper part of the eye, it's going into rounding in towards the eye, which means on the upper side it's rounding away from the light source, whereas underneath it's rounding towards the light source, so you'll have a burst of highlight on that bottom side. And around the eye I'm a little bit more careful, because we'll pick up, you know, any stray hair going into it. So just being mindful, my light source is over here, which means all of this edge would be going into shadow, just that little bit, not a lot. Whereas, you know, this edge against the eye would be kicking into highlight. I may darken this. Sorry, my voice didn't want to come out. I may darken this dark gray a bit. The color difference isn't quite as much as I was hoping it would be. But we'll get it all drawn in first, and then I'll probably darken it up. It's easy to do in Photoshop. So a little shadowing back here as a result of the ear, so I'm just adding a little bit of that before it kicks back into highlight. Giving a little burst of light under the eye. On this side, just like we did over here, light would likely be picking up, especially their faces are forward facing like humans, so the light would likely be catching just under the eye. And then we'll fade it out. Now I'm just going to change the color, so I did a select all, nudge that layer, going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill it with the color we just did, which is a darker gray. Oh yeah, that shows up better. Alright, now for the ears and the nose, I'm going to lightly fill in the ears first before I start sorting out shadows and highlights. So by that I mean, you know, I'm holding back my pin pressure. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the other one too first, and then we'll get to the highlights after that. Alright, so if the light source is coming from over here, you would have some light hitting an edge, but the ear itself is rounding in, and so likely the light is going to be bouncing just a bit on where this edge is kind of coming in, right? Like you have an ear that's shaped like this, so as the light's coming in, you're going to have this side that's aimed more out, and this side that's aimed more in, so it would be in shadow, but you would still have an edge before it dips that would obviously be catching. So that's what we're going to do. As it comes down, it'll go more into shadow, so we won't do that. The edge out here is going to be in shadow. Pretty narrow ear bridges, I don't even know what to call it. The edge of the ear is pretty narrow. And then the same is true on this side, right? You're going to have a little bit of highlighting here, not as much, and then some highlighting on this side. Now we have the nose. Under the nostril always goes into shadow. Right, it's rounding away from the light source. Underneath might pick up some highlight. I'm going to fill up under the white as well. Although it might be on top, I might have to change the order. There's also a dip here in the middle. They have like a little dip in their noses. So you would have some shadowing on this side as it dips. But then on the opposite, there might be a little burst of light. Not all the way underneath, because that certainly would be in shadow as it rounds down and into the face, but likely would have a little bit. Now, their eyes are brown. Make it a little bit more reddish. Debating on how big to make their pupils. There's so much dark space. Much like owls, I may go all the way around, as opposed to doing the half and allowing the shadow to kick in. And just lessen off the highlights when we get to the top. Let's give them a nice big pupil. I believe they typically do have a big one. So with the light source coming from the right and above, I'm going to put a burst of highlight against the pupil on the far side, and then highlight the eye on the side of the highlight and all the way underneath before it goes into shadow. Same on this side. So we're just going to start with a burst of light. And it fades off at the edge. And then of course the edge by the pupil is also in shadow. Just that little bit, it's not a lot. It's basically indicating this is a recess. But it connects into this highlight underneath. I want to keep this section up here pretty dark. I'm just sort of making sure it's feathered in. So that's a nice gentle transition. Now the last thing we're going to do is add the light flare. I'm going to change this to the off-white I always use. Just take the circular select tool. I'm going to start on the side of the shadow, and we're just going to make a little flare of light that is in the highlighted section. So I wouldn't put it up in the shadow, which is why I always start on the eye that's more in shadow, because often you're dealing with less space if you're having something look at you. His eyes are so big it's not going to really impact, but and then it always goes on the side of the pupil that's on the side of the light source. And then we just fill it with the foreground color. Alright. I think that works. He looks pretty cute. I'm going to give him a few little whiskers down here. Same kind of light gray. Nothing big. Alright, so that is how you draw a bush baby. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.